Welcome. Good evening, everyone. There's no way I can begin an evening dedicated to our favorite spy without this famous quotation from the novel, Dr. No. And I would like a medium vodka dry martini with a slice of lemon peel, shaken and not stirred. Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Schwartz, your drinking companion, and this is Lush Life Book Club at Oriole, the Divine Oriole. I'm so happy to be here. For those who don't know me, I write the blog lushlifemanual.com, and for the past 6 years, I've been hosting Lush Life Podcast, where I interview people in the drinks industry. I am so thrilled to be here with 3 of my favorite people, and to discuss their book, Shaken, which is Drinking with James Bond and Ian Fleming. Mia, who is originally from Umeå in Sweden, began her cocktail career in London, working at prestigious venues, including Mark's Bar at Hicks, with Nick Strangeway and Milk and Honey in London. Bobby, who is originally from Scotland, started his career in Edinburgh, working in clubs. And when he moved to London in 2009, he met his business partner and wife, Mia Johansson. After working together at Milk and Honey, they moved to New York, where Mia created the bar Lafayette Grand Cafe, and Bobby opened the acclaimed Dead Rabbit. They returned to London, and in 2016, they opened Swift in partnership with another industry couple, Edmund Weil and Roisin Stimson, who is here, and most recently, a second site, Swift Shoreditch. If you guys don't already know this, Swift Soho has since gone on to become a multi-award-winning bar, most recently winning Bar of the Year at the 2020 Class Bar Awards, plus Imbibe Bar Owners of the Year in 2018. Now, on to Edmund. Since entering the industry in 2009, Edmund's bar, one of which we are sitting in right now, his bar concepts have been consistently recognized and acclaimed by the drinks industry and public alike, earning multiple accolades and ever present on the world's 50 best bar list. He also writes a column for Class magazine since 2016, so go and read that. Now, it's pretty much Bond fever right now. So I am so thrilled to be talking about this book and bringing it to life. For those of you who haven't read Shaken, it is an amazing combination of extracts from the book, stories about the cocktails that are in the book, and, most importantly, recipes and cocktails created and recreated from the book by Mia and Bobby. So, let's get started. Enough of intros. So, we got to start at the beginning. How did this project even begin?
Well, in one word, nepotism. I actually happen to be very distantly related to Ian Fleming. And Ian's sort of estate and his literary rights and stuff are still held in the family. So it's actually the family of his brother, Peter Fleming, who was quite a famous explorer himself, and his descendants, who are kind of, they're like the guardians of his literary estate. And obviously you guys will have seen that, you know, there's still quite a lot of Bond publications coming out. They get fantastic, you know, contemporary authors to write new Bond stuff, like people like Sebastian Faulks. And they approached me with the idea to do a sort of Ian Fleming and Bond themed cocktail book. I think, you know, partly because they knew that I ran these bars, and so, you know, hopefully I'd be a fairly good qualified person to talk about, you know, Bond and Fleming in the context of cocktails and drinking. And so at that time, that was 2017, and we opened Swift probably about 6 or 8 months previously. So,
November 2016.
The 4 of us had been working very, very closely together for a long time. For a relatively short time, but very, very intensely together. And effectively, I knew that, you know, I'm not a mixologist in the way that these guys are. I'm a sort of operations front of house guy, and so I knew that I was going to need some real help when it came to bringing these concepts to life in cocktails. And because of the style of Swift's drinks in particular, like Swift's drinks are delicious, they're accessible, they're the kind of drinks that if someone really stretched themselves, they'd be able to make at home.
Well, they're built on classics, really. That's their twists on classics.
Exactly. So I couldn't really think of anyone better to help me with it, but I have to admit that I felt quite nervous approaching them because, I don't know, anyone who's like been involved in any big project, but like a bar opening is one of the most all-consuming things that you can do. And we were very much under the cosh when it came in. So even though it was obviously an amazing opportunity, I did feel a little bit sheepish when I said, "Do you guys fancy doing a cocktail book, maybe?"
So where do you even start? Did you start by reading the books, seeing every movie? I mean,
well, the great advantage is that obviously Ian Fleming Publications as an entity understand the literary bond like nobody else. And the good thing is they kind of had quite a clear brief in mind of how they wanted the book to be structured. So they wanted to base it around the obviously characters in the novels, obviously Bond himself, and kind of the kind of the things like weapons and stuff that attach themselves to him.
Ian's interests, a lot of Ian's interests.
Well.
Exactly, a lot of Ian's interests, and I think that's something that's really important to kind of stress about this book, is that it's very much based around the literary bond, and we all know the films, and they're fantastic, but for those who don't or haven't read the books or don't know, they are actually very, very well written books.
Oh yeah.
They're great thrillers. I mean, obviously, you could say they're very much of their time in certain ways, but they're definitely worth picking up and reading.
And like in regards to like the drinks, they are described in quite a short way, sometimes longer, just like the Vesper, but most often it will just be a very vague description. And me and Bobby are very much fact nerds, so we went into going like, what was available at the time, when was this written, what city are we in, what kind of area would we be in here, what would this kind of actually be described as, what would be available. So we went into kind of like the deeper books of what was other books being written at the time that were cocktail based, and kind of researched backwards with that, and then referenced that with the Fleming estate to make sure that we were kind of fact checking each other.
and could you pick any character that you wanted, or did they give you that?
No, I think they had a pretty clear idea of the best characters to work with. But I mean, the thing is that the Bond novels are full of fantastically rich, like well-written characters. And actually, I would say the characters were probably the easiest element to work with. Kissy, Suzuki, Pussy Galore, Blofeld. They're really strong characters that are easy to. Well, I say easy, less challenging. I think probably the most challenging drink that there was one that we needed to make around the theme of Ian Fleming's love of golf.
Or the fugu poison, making a poisonous drink that somebody would actually like to drink. Sorry, hi in the back there for everyone. I'm sorry you're getting the back of our heads over there. But making a poisonous drink was one of those going like, how do we make this sound really tasty, but also give you the impression that you're going to drink it and die? Which was one of those going like, how do we do this? But it was fun. We ended up using electric bitters, which is something that the Oriole guys actually introduced to us quite a few years ago. And it's something that has this little flower, and it makes your tongue tingle. And we were like, well, that's quite a fun kind of aspiration where it's not going to make you die, but you get to have this experience that something is actually happening. But yeah, that was kind of the big challenges, because it was all about living into the character that Ian had written. And we had to really make that feel like the drink.
And how long did the process take? I guess, well, I mean, from, getting the character to writing it to then creating the drink, like each drink.
From getting the brief, that involved obviously doing the research, trying to weave in passages from the books into the kind of text of the book, and kind of creating a brief for that cocktail, and then writing it, and then passing that on to me and Bobby, who then had to come up with
manifest it.
Exactly, to manifest the concept. And I think it's actually an extraordinarily challenging thing to do. And I mean, yeah, I was amazed by.
It was very grateful, your word of writing. Like Edmund is an English teacher at Trade before all of these fantastic things. So like his writing is so beautiful, just kind of matching with Ian. It's so descriptive.
It's very clear.
And it's very fairy tale. So like me, Bobby can very much kind of like imagine our world, and then we can fact check back, going like, okay, Blofeld had some Greek influence in his history. Great, we can match that with those details, moving into that kind of basis. But we got to live ourselves into the world that Edmund had kind of like written for us, which made it quite easy.
Yeah, it was really helpful. But we also had a brief from the publishers as well that we had to go like, oh, this has to have kind of German influence, but also Russian influence. And then we're like, okay, thank you. That's really helpful. But then, yes, there's a lot of kind of working around this. Go, we can make this work, and that's what Mia and I do really well. Is we kind of create these. We know what flavors work with each other and what kind of things we can put together that will still stay true to what is needed basically from the book, from the character, from the individual.
Did they also not only tell you which characters to use, but also tell you which spirits to use with the characters?
No.
Not necessarily.
Oh,
No,
good.
it wasn't
All right,
like
all
you
right.
needed
I
to
was
put
like,
vodka.
oh God.
But it's more just like, okay, you would get a character brief. So, for
Okay.
example, I think it's, what's the guy? He's like half Irish, half German, is it?
Red Grant.
Yeah, Red Grant, there you go, exactly. And so that's the kind of thing where manifesting that in a spirituous form, like they're not necessarily kind of concepts or flavors that go together. And I think that's what Bobby's talking about.
But that's when we went like, okay, we got obviously Irish whiskey, we've got Red Grant, so we need to play out the character role. We're like beautiful, Campari, and we're moving into that kind of area. But also we need to really showcase that he's got roots. We got beetroot is a fantastic thing for this because it's like pop. Oh, sorry. But it's like, if I'm not mistaken, this is excuse me, it's been 4 years and there's 50 drinks. But it's Campari, beetroot,
Yeah,
and
Campari, beetroot,
Irish. Yeah.
Vermouth and chili.
Yeah. Delicious, good drink. And it has a handmade beetroot flour that I made on the day. And I remember on the photo shoot there, my heads were completely soaking red for 3 days.
We're totally going to go more into the cocktails, but in a sec, let's just go back to Ian Fleming as a novelist and as a drinker and eater himself. He did say, I myself abhor wine and foodmanship, but yet he has a character drinking the best that you can get, eating foie gras, eating langoustines in Casino Royale. So did you learn a lot about Ian Fleming during this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was lying when he said he abhorred food and drinkmanship, because actually what comes through reading, obviously the Bond works, but also his non-fiction work. So he reviewed a lot of restaurants, he wrote some very good travel writing. There's a compilation called Thrilling Cities, where he kind of gives you a snapshot of various kind of hotspots around the world. And he's a great descriptive writer at all times, but when it really comes through is when he's talking about food and drink. And I think it's funny, like there's some people took issue when the first Fleming books came out that Ian Fleming was kind of like a bit of a name dropper. Like, it's not just Bond ordered champagne, but the Bond ordered, Dom Perignon 1932 or whatever it might be. And he's always takes great pleasure in describing the supercharger on his Bentley or whatever. And likewise, with the drink, he orders the Gordons as part of the Vesper.
Yeah.
And I think that was because actually Ian Fleming cared quite deeply about what went into things, how things were prepared. There's an interesting story about how he actually wrote to the Distillers Association in the UK. Well, he'd had a heart attack, so he'd been limited to, I think, 2 or 3 drinks a day, which is, at the time it seemed to be, enough to keep you in good health. Obviously, it didn't work for him, but he basically said, what are the best quality spirits that I can possibly drink? Because if I'm going to only have these 2-3 drinks a day, I want them to be the best, the purest. And I think he was a huge lover of food and drink, and that shines through in everything that he writes. And I think the books come alive when they're talking about what he drank. And also, I mean, there was a really funny BMJ, British Medical Journal study in 2003 where they actually looked to try and quantify the amount that James Bond was drinking through the books, and it's pretty prodigious. They work out that he averages 132 units a week.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's not true.
No.
He averages 90 units
90,
a week,
right.
but in You Only Live Twice, he gets through 132, and on day 3 of From Russia with Love, he gets through 40 units in a single day. So there's a lot of material there, put it that way.
And then he fights crime and beats Russians and does all these things on top of that. He's not just lying down and having a nap and then like a burger. He's then up and like swimming through seas.
Killing people. Yeah, something from the book. Another quote from the book was, one journalist recently consumed the food and alcohol allocated to Bond during one day in Goldfinger. He found himself barely able to move, let alone infiltrate an international criminals headquarters.
For sure.
That's about right. And I think
But at that time as well, it was very important to you showcase who you were, because it just been prohibition. You showcase who you were through drinking and what you were eating. It was kind of like making a statement piece, and really like just as much as what you were wearing and what you were driving, what you were eating and drinking, because of what was available at the time. It had been rations before. So having something that was like a glass of champagne or ordering by a brand was something that was not available for everyone else. So creating a character like James Bond or 007, it was very much in his character to be like what you were eating and drinking was showcase who he was as a person, who he wanted to be. And therefore, you kind of lived your way into his life. You got to know him much more. And I think that was quite a beautiful thing. Is some those details, if we didn't know, that's the things that we're talking about still today. We're drinking James Bond's drink. We can live like our way into his life.
But you're right, yeah, because at the time, yeah, it was almost like redefining what luxury meant after a time of great austerity. And there's also some quite comic moments that you get from that. So, for example, in Casino Royale, Bond starts his meal with a half an avocado pear with vinaigrette, and then finishes it with a single slice of pineapple. And at the time, these things would have been like great luxuries because they've been so scarce. But it kind of that there's a way in which the eating and drinking it's very much of its time in that.
And like if you look at I think it's like champagne was mentioned in the book a total of one.
This is part of the
Oh,
quiz later.
Yeah,
Later. By the
there's
way.
a quiz.
Yes,
there's no
quiz.
But I'm just saying in regards to the everyday drink, which we all refer to as like beer. We would all drink beer. He was definitely not a big fanatic of beer, or it's kind of like the kind of casual drinking. In that case, it needed to be something that had a bit of like vagabond feel to it when he was drinking, which is very much. But when then he was making drinks himself, or did you want to talk about the old man thing?
Oh yeah, well what I was going to say was that for someone, Ian Fleming, who spent so much time in Jamaica,
Yeah.
this may be telling you too much for the quiz, but James Bond doesn't really drink that much rum, whereas Ian Fleming was drinking a lot of rum. And you brought up one of his drinks.
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
his
So he obviously had his own interest, even though he himself wasn't particularly fond of making his own martinis and stuff at home. He very much ordered them precisely. And if he was pouring himself, it would have been like probably whiskey or champagne if it was in-house. But when he was in Jamaica, he made a drink called the Old Man Thing, which was a really weird little punch bowl that we've made in... Punch is a loose term. It was in a bowl. The drink that's in the book is a beautiful, light, refreshing punch bowl, just of the style, with Assam tea, and it's lovely, and it's got mandarin, and it's refreshing. But the way he made it, well, I think it was something like several bottles of Jamaican rum, the peels of orange and a lime, no fruit, don't touch the fruit, don't even squeeze the fruit, and then set the bowl on fire with a match. And that's what you're supposed to be drinking. I'm like, I wonder, that's probably not something Bond would have drunken, but that's definitely something that Ian would have at a fest.
It was basically his party trick, a golden eye. So he lived in Jamaica. He wrote all of the Bond books in Jamaica, and spent more and more time there as he got older. Old man's thing is his party trick. Basically, it was pure rum lit on fire.
Yeah, with a bit of effervescence
we
on
have an old
citrus
man's
oil.
thing in the book, which is not just pure rum.
No. delicious, and it's a lovely punch bowl, and it's something to tell home, but to tell the story of they could have been had something else, but they're having this delicious bowl.
I know, it made me think that there was not that much to do in Jamaica then, because everyone would just go over, and because the next day, forget it, I'm sure you could never even get up after drinking this. Because literally it was pure alcohol. Now on to Bond and the drinks. You took so many of these amazing cocktails. You made them, you recreated. So first, let's talk about the classic cocktails, Bobby. Maybe how you reworked or added your own spin to the classic cocktails, because James Bond drinks a lot of bourbon. He drinks, obviously, the martinis, but he even drinks a Negroni in the book, which surprised me. I was like, oh, he was so hip.
He's trendy, isn't it? But no, there's Negroni's been around since the late 19th, just after the First World War, actually. The Negroni's been around. But yeah, I think in the book there's 10 kind of essentially unadulterated classics. There's 40 or so that Mia and I have come up with that are kind of a lot to do with the characters and directly to do with that. But I think there's still 10 or 12, I think. Actual like direct classics, old-fashioned Negronis, daiquiris, and these kind of things. And we relay a lot of what we do at Swift into these drinks, in that we put a lot of kind of what people drink nowadays and the flavour palette, and obviously kind of modern techniques of distillation, etc., that we could put into the spirits, so we can go like, this is how we would make an old-fashioned. Now this is what we believe is a delicious old-fashioned. It's actually slightly different to what historically, for example, an old-fashioned whiskey cocktail or a whiskey cocktail, depending on how far back you want to go, would be made. But then there has to be some kind of element of creative license in these kind of things, because a lot of the ingredients aren't ingredients are made very differently. Palates are different. Like there are so many variables that you just can't be as completely true to historic. It's good to know where drinks come from, and it's really important for that. So what we did, we went as close to a palette that we think would be as nice as that, but also would be made in the kind of times of Fleming and when he would make them. So
yeah, no, and also the fact that like one of the things that you probably would mention is that like techniques. There's a lot of new techniques that they didn't have in like the early 1900s. Is this, we know about texture and mouthfeel and like ABVs, and we know just about like how to filter our juices. And it was like, if you were having a daiquiri back then, it probably would have been like with old brown caster sugar, and like it would be gritty on your teeth, and it would be lingering, and probably be a bit overproof and burn your nose a bit. Probably really tasty if you're on a beach, delicious. But if you're sitting in a bar, you want it to be smooth and mouthful, and you're making it home, you want to know the correct way of making. Same way you make an omelette, you want to know the correct way of making, I don't know, Gordon Ramsay's omelet. You want to know why it looks so good in the movies. You want to make that yourself. So we took creative license of making sure that when you make it at home, you have those little tips and tricks of how to make it just that little bit better, a little bit more perfect. And then we respected the fact that these are classics, so they should be tasting like a classic, looking like a classic. You should be wanting to live into the world of like drinking in them when they were made, so you can still feel that. So there needed to be a parallel between the two.
And I think the thing about classic cocktails as well is that, you know, in many ways, a simple classic is the best measure of a bartender, because, you know, you don't have lots of different layers of flavour to hide behind as a general rule. You know, it's about the spirit that you select to use, the proportions you're going to choose. Like, you know, the martini, which is Ian Fleming's favourite drink and James Bond's favourite drink, is probably the best example of that, in that, you know, the choice of spirit, the choice of vermouth, the choice of proportions, how it's prepared, how long it's stirred for, how cold your glass is, all of that has so much impact on the final drink. And you know, Ian Fleming, for example, as Mia referenced, never made his own martinis. He was very good at directing people. He liked it 6-1 with vodka as a general rule, although he would take gin if he was in a British pub. That's what's so important about having the classics in there, is that, you know, how a classic is prepared, how it's done, is, you know, so much about the skill of the bartender and their choice of the ingredient.
Oh, I was wondering, while you were speaking, when you were doing research on the books, did you find that Bond was drinking certain things at certain times? Like, you know, he's about to beat up someone, so he's, you know, gonna have the bourbon and soda. You know, oh, he's lounging or trying it on with a girl, he's drinking that martini.
I'm not sure I picked up on that so
Oh,
much.
I picked up on a couple of things where he were more or less like, one book, it was definitely allowed to drink brandy and ginger ale. Then the next book, that was like a poor man's drink, and you could never drink that. And I'm like, you're not really giving me a break here. It was very much a scenario going like, okay, so that's obviously where Ian's taken a twist of the fact here. And then we kind of tried to just play along going like, okay, maybe that would have been 5 years later, and that's obviously not trending like the New York Times anymore. Somebody else has mentioned something. But then I think he drank a lot of champagne when he was with the ladies.
Exactly that. That's the only trend I picked up on that. He
Yeah.
tended to drink kind of martinis and champagne and cocktails when with people.
Yeah,
he-
and also-
whiskey by himself.
Yeah.
But that was not a rule by any stretch.
Whiskey
but
when he was in his bedroom or with
Yeah,
like
post-
Felix, his best mate.
Post-fight.
When it was with
yeah.
Felix, his best mate, he was a Texan, so they would drink like a lot of whiskey kind of style.
But yeah, I mean, obviously there's a kind of geographical bent as well. So his Negroni he has in Italy, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I'm not sure he actually drinks a daiquiri, but he encounters a lot of daiquiris in the Caribbean.
Well, from the book, I gathered that really a lot of the women are drinking daiquiris.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And Bond is not drinking a lot of daiquiris.
No, and you can see that kind of influence in like the Honey Child, which is, she was kind of like described as like this Tarzan of a lady who grew up with the animals, loved the animals, and she was the one that walks up on the beach in the bikini, and the sweetest of humans. And like we were like, okay, we need to make a rum drink. She's from the
In the book, there's no bikini.
Yes.
Oh,
she's naked. But Ursula Andress probably said no.
oh well, we made a peanut butter banana exotic kind of bitters kind of daiquiri style to kind of showcase who she would have been in a drink scenario for the book.
All right, I think we have to go to some of the villains though.
Oh.
So talk me through how you created probably the most famous villain, Blofeld.
So Blofeld, well, do you want to talk about Blofeld or should I talk about Blofeld? Well, it was obvious that it was going to be something like quite strong, bold, sharp, cold.
It had to be striking as well. That was
Yeah.
the big thing. It had to be. It couldn't just be this dry drink. It couldn't just be this uninteresting. Like Martini, I love a Martini and that, but it's a very clean, it's a very elegant drink. And Blofeld is more of a.
He was an evil
He was a
genius.
striking character. He had to have this.
He has Polish and
something
Greek
about it.
influence, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, what did we put? Yeah, we did. Yeah, but
Yeah,
Belvedere
we
for the Polish, Mystica for the Greek kind of earthiness. But then I think we put some lychee because he had like the Japanese death garden.
Yeah, no, it's also, no, I think it's because obviously Blofeld famously has one kind of milky, kind of haunting
that was
eye.
the lychee
so
fruit.
the garnish, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, but also I think the lychee fruit because he had like a garden of death in Japan, and we were like, this is like a Japanese kind of scenario, and we were like, that's the influence in drink, and then we took the fruit and made it as like this kind of like garnish, and it's very much the kind of strike. I mean, he has a big rocky iceberg of a garnish, like as an ice cream, but like this really showcase like a strong, evil, ruthless character, and it's one of those, and we just imagine him holding it as a bowl, this big chunky piece of glass as well. And we're just like, ugh. Yeah, it's banging good. It is very good. Very
I
strong.
also love that it
Very
has
strong.
vodka in it because, of course, James Bond drank
Yeah.
vodka martini. So I thought, yes,
Yeah.
he's as equal,
Yeah.
Yeah.
equally as bad as James Bond is good.
Vodka isn't that bad. Speaking from a Swedish perspective, vodka is a good thing.
No,
No, but as in they mirror
they're
each other.
equal. They mirror each other.
Yeah,
right,
right.
right. They're equals in that. Now, all right, let's go to the Dr. Bird.
Oh, that's really sweet, Edmund. Actually, this was an homage to you and Rosie.
If you look around, you can see some birds.
So Ian was from the Fleming estate. Told us very much that he was a lover of bird. He was an ornithologist in the making, and he loved the concept of watching birds. And we thought it was so fitting with Ed and Rosie taking the inspiration 10 years ago to opening Nightjar and then Oriole, and then they named Swift when Swift came about. That was their baby with Swift. And there was all the kind of bird process. So the fact that they had this connotation, we thought that was really nice, leaving this like secret drink in the menu that nobody knows, but actually has a massive heart from all of us. So the two base spirits in there is Dorley's XO, which has a macaw, blue macaw on the bottle, and an Eagle Rare, which has an American bald eagle on it. And we thought that was quite a nice little marriage of making, like, it's a traditional, beautiful sour with tea, But we thought it was nice kind of leaving like a little trademark that's a bit hidden that nobody knows about, that has like an homage both to Ian's ornithologist, but also you guys for kind of connecting us all together.
Also, I mean, Ian Fleming was a big bird lover as well. I mean, it's a story that some of you may know, that James Bond, the name, actually came about because a book that he had on his desk, which was something like Birds of the Caribbean. It was written by an ornithologist whose name was James Bond. And now, actually, the logo of the Ian Fleming estate is a little hummingbird. Because that was one of the
The
birds.
swallowtail is the Jamaican national bird, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
And everyone has got a welcome drink, and that drink is the money penny. So tell us about that.
So this quintessentially British person played by Judi Dench more recently.
No, so in the book she was in the book she was a beautiful, elegant English rose.
Judi Dench was cute, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was. But that's okay.
Yeah, you were talking about.
In the books, Moneypenny was a quintessential English rose. We wanted to make something. What does an English rose drink? We're thinking something refreshing. We're thinking English garden. We're thinking cucumber. We wanted something that was a little bit Pimm's-like, but a little bit lighter. So we have a bit of coque americano, a bit of gin, making it with fresh cucumber. So it was very inspiration by English rose, countryside, Pimm's, that kind of style drinking, because she was very much that. That was something very stylish, very clean, very elegant, helped Bond along by being a backup, but that was kind of the take behind the drink.
Also, now, we have two of the most famous ones. And of course, the Vesper Martini, which we have to spend a little bit of time on. And I think we need to read from the book.
I'll read. This is one of my favorite parts. So excuse my English, I am Swedish, for anyone who hasn't figured the accent out and has been wondering all night.
They know that. You're from Umeå.
Yes, I'm Irish in New York. 3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka, half a measure of quinoa lily. Shake it very well until it's ice cold. Then add a large thin slice of lemon peel. Got it? Certainly, monsieur. The barman seemed pleased with this idea. Gosh, that's certainly a drink, said Liza. Bond laughed. When I'm concentrating, he explained. I've never had more than 1 drink before dinner, but I do like that one to be large and very strong, very cold and very well made. I hate small portions of anything, particularly when they taste bad. This drink's my own invention. I'm going to patent it when I can think of a good name. Casino Royale, Chapter 7, Rouge et Noir. I can't drink the health of your new frock without knowing your Christian name. Vesper, she said. Vesper Lind. Bond gave her a look of inquiry. It's rather a bore always having to explain, but I was born in the evening, on a very stormy evening, according to my parents. Apparently they wanted to remember it, she smiled. Some people like it, others don't. I'm just used to it. I think it's a fine name, said Bond. An idea struck him. Can I borrow it? He explained about the special martini he invented and his search for a name for it. The Vesper, he said. It sounds perfect and it's very appropriate to the violet hour when my cocktail will be now drunk all over the world. Can I have it? So long as I can try one first, she promised. It sounds like a drink to be proud of. We'll all have one together when this is all finished, said Bond. Casino Royale, Chapter 8, Pink Lights and Champagne.
Now, why don't you tell us what the ingredients are? Now.
Well, what you haven't changed. Or what we did, we stayed as true as we could, to be honest with you. The idea is essentially it's essentially an 8-to-1 martini. It's 6 parts gin, 2 parts vodka, 1 part fortified wine of sorts. Now, quinoa lily, most Bond people know that it's a product that doesn't exist anymore. It's essentially more bitter, more herbaceous version of lily, which exists now. What we did, we used
Coque Americano.
We used Coque Americano, exactly. We used Coque Americano, which is a kind of Italian substitute, the French version, which is not. It's as close as you're going to get to quinoa lily at the moment without kind of making your own product. So that has the herbaceousness, the brightness of quinoa lily. We've had like several historians, David Condren, for example. He has had samples of quinoa lily and kind of vertical taste them, and that's about as close as you're going to get.
Yeah, and don't make it yourself because the roots actually can make it poisonous. It's very distinctive.
Yeah, honestly,
Don't make it yourself.
Don't play around with it, please don't. inherent problem that I have with a Vesper is that the vodka doesn't really do very much. It really doesn't. So you've got 6 parts gin and 2 parts vodka. So the vodka is essentially just making the gin a bit less ginny.
He says this to a vodka fan, which makes it really striking every time he says it.
The point on this is that I reckon this drink was written by Ian Fleming in the 50s, and this would have been a time like peak Cold War time. So the fact, but at the same time, it's exactly when Smirnoff was created, or the model was kind of pushing into the American market, which is kind of actually an impressive thing. Smirnoff's right in its own right to have a Cold War product to actually just be that influential in America is a really impressive marketing tactic in its own right. So I reckon it was in there as just to show that Bond was a trendy person and knew what was ready.
So as said, but I'll tell you, I work in vodka, which is probably why I'm really, really passionate about it. So I'm sorry if I'm a bit too enthusiastic. But back then, if you were drinking vodka, you were drinking the best because nothing had to be flavored. So anything else was flavored back then because it was so poorly made that they were like, okay, this is drinkable. But if you showcase yourself as drinking something as neat as vodka with as little of its ingredient as even just a nod towards a vermouth, you know you were drinking quality. And that's why people were drinking vodka at the time. That's why vodka became so prominent, is because you were showcased drinking something that was so well made that it hardly tasted of anything. Can't tell that to my heart, but that was the theme behind it. And that's why vodka became such a vagabond, trendy. Like if you're drinking a martini, you showcase that you had something of quality.
Yeah, the marketing phrase in the 50s is Smirnoff leaves you breathless.
Yeah.
Which was incredibly clever for the working lunchman. Exactly the idea is you can have a martini at lunch and you won't have alcohol, which is super clever for people in the 50s.
Yeah.
Now, there's also, Ian Fleming had something to say about the Vesper, right?
I mean, that's the funny thing. I think that's what makes the Vesper such a kind of a cipher of a cocktail. He apparently claimed to a friend, a couple of years after writing Casino Royale, that he actually just dashed it onto the page. Because I think when he first started writing Bond, it was just a hobby. He was not expecting it to become the kind of phenomenon it's become. And he said, yeah, I just dashed it onto the page. I tried making it a few months later and it was foul. I think Ian Fleming loved to tell a good story. And so who knows if that was actually true. But I think it is, as Bobby says, it's a drink that shouldn't really work. Like, the received wisdom nowadays is that you stir a martini, you don't shake a martini. And why put vodka in a gin martini? And yet, it's a drink that is called, day after day, year after year, all over the world. There are bars named after it here, there, and everywhere. And obviously, the Bond cachet helps, but it's a drink that I think people still enjoy drinking. And I think it's a drink that a huge amount of study has gone into in the bar community of how to make it work.
Many arguments between married couples as well. But however, it's more like a scenario where you need to really respect the dilution, because dilution, as Edmund was speaking about before, and a cold glass and the method of making it has so much in it that is equal towards the ingredients. Because if you over dilute a martini, there's nothing worse. You're drinking a really heavy flavored glass of water and it's not enjoyable. But under diluting it as well, you're not going to get that crisp, sharp, refreshing feeling that you want from a Vesper. And using something that's a lighter style vermouth, you're not going to get that little bit of sweet texture that you need from the vermouth to really enhance the flavors that's sitting in the gin and the vodka.
Yeah,
And the bitters. Yeah.
I can see a guest who's ordered one already, so I hope it's working out for them.
We're all having
It is on the menu. You will take it out.
one, please.
But it's respect to the drink of the fact that the method equals, 3 please, 4 please, 4 please. And that's the whole point of it. It needs to be respected, and that's why we've written so much detail into how you're making it, and freeze your glassware first and do that, because it becomes a drinking experience, and that's what the books are about. It's about living your way into the world of a drinking experience, an enjoyable experience. It's not something just you whip one up. You don't whip a Vesper up. You dress up for it. You put on a nice shirt. You make sure there's some music in the background and you have a good Vesper. That's the whole point. Otherwise, just have a glass of wine or gin and tonic. You'll be fine. But it's an experience in itself, and it should be respected as that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and also links back to kind of how aspirational the Bond books were back in their day, and going back to these kind of, you know, really kind of beautifully worded, worked up descriptions of beautiful cars, watches, clothes, tales, coffee as well. You know, James Bond drinks Blue Mountain coffee. He uses an American Chemex to filter it. You know, it's all described in such detail, and as we know, we're coming out of a world where the availability of quality products was so low, and all of a sudden, you know, at the highest strata, you were starting to see this stuff again, and the people who picked these books up, I think, saw something that, you know, whether, you know, it was a sort of the birth of the consumerism that kind of built, you know, that won America the Cold War, if you like. But at the same time, I think there's something quite beautiful about it, because who doesn't love beautiful things and great quality spirits and wines and food? And I think, you know, it was almost like the rebirth of really appreciating that for the general public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and mixing it in with adventure, sex, love, you know, all of those things. Murder. But one thing that you brought up in the book about Vesper is Vesper Lind was a character that James Bond loved. But if you listen carefully, and I don't know if this is true or not, it sounds like
West Berlin.
West Berlin. And that was his little, you know, no, it's from the book.
Yeah.
That it was his kind of nod to the Cold War, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's lots of stories about how it might have come about. There's also a story of how I think he was visiting a friend's house in Jamaica, and obviously Vespers is like evening prayers.
And Vesper is the Latin name for the not bee, right? Is it? It's a wasp. Vesper is the Latin name for a. It's not a bee. Was it a wasp? A wasp. So I was like, maybe that's her personality, being born in a storm.
So the butler came out with pre-dinner drinks and said, "Vespers are served," and so perhaps he got the idea from that as well.
Yeah. It's so nice to end on the Vesper Lind, but we do have. I wanted to talk about all the ones that are on our list, our cocktail list for tonight, and there's one more, Pussy Galore. All right, so I guess we have to end on Pussy Galore. So why don't you tell us a little bit how you created that?
So it's actually a drink that I've been working on before you came to us about the book, and it's a twist on a Manhattan. And it's supposed to be like a wintry cold Manhattan with a bit of a bite. So it's got the bourbon in there, sweet vermouth, it's got maraschino, it's got a bit of Brancamenta and a little bit of Crème de Menthe to bring that winter feel. Because Pussy Galore was a fierce woman with a lot of gumption, and she was a gang leader in New York, born and raised proper Manhattan. And me and my husband used to live in Manhattan, and I decided with this woman, I'm like, my favorite drink is a Manhattan. I'm like, I'm gonna really showcase you, and I know who you are. I know who you are as a person, and she's so fierce. And I was like, I'm gonna make sure that there's a bit of sweetness, there's a bit of love in there. The Hudson bourbon that we're using is the first bourbon that actually came on the market, being made in Manhattan after Prohibition. It's all like born and raised, proper solid earth New Yorker that she really is, and she like leads a gang of women. And they're all really like fantastic villains that are so beautifully portrayed. I just thought she was one of my favorites. She was so fierce.
I just like to use the word gumption. Good word.
Yeah, gumption. If I can recommend anyone buying the book, it's a beautiful book. I took the inspiration to write it. My mom's been a huge Bond fan since I was born. Her love of life was James Bond when I grew up. So it's an homage to her, but it's been so nice to see everyone buying them for Christmas presents for family members. So if anyone wants to buy them, they're up here. We'd love to sign them if there's a special note. But if you can recommend anything to learn how to make, start with the classics in the book. They're the ones you need the fewest ingredients for. It starts the methods up, and then you can really build from there. And thank you so much to Keto and Diageo for having us to talk about this. It makes me really happy. But that's why I was saying, like, if you can make a Vesper with that, do that and dress up for New Year's Eve, because it becomes the best experience you can ever have.
Okay, well, I could quiz you on every single cocktail all night, but we have limited time here. So I wanted to open it up for questions. If anyone has any, don't be shy.
You mentioned how Ian Fleming's favourite coffee is Johansson, and that's the most popular coffee in Jamaica,
Yeah.
and the Caribbean. And also, there is the national bird of Jamaica.
Yeah.
Is the streamer tail.
Ah. Can everyone hear this?
Well, when we researched Fleming House, we were quite distinctly told that it was a hummingbird swallowtail that was the national bird, and I was wondering if that is a different name for it, because one of the doilies actually has the hummingbird swallowtails on the bottle. So all of the different doilies that we're using, they have different birds on it. The one, the Exo Macau, is the one that we used for this one, but they have the bird, the swallowtail on there, and I reckon that they're probably just different names. But that's so fascinating that you say that.
Who makes streamer tail?
Sorry?
Who makes streamer tail?
It's an independent.
Ah.
It's the ambassador, the owner's name is Archie.
Oh, cool.
Good old Archie.
We'll be sure to check out Street Tail Rum. Yeah.
Google Archie.
Right. Email Archie and say, I want to try your rum. All right.
Yeah, for sure.
Seriously, yeah. No.
We will.
We're gonna check it out for sure.
Thank you so much.
If I'd heard of it, then I probably would have heard of it. It sounds great.
This is why I love the whole Fleming community has so much facts and interest in this, that's why it's been such a fun project to work on. It's just such a huge people coming with pointers and research, and we were completely nervous that when the book launched, because this is the first official one, that we hadn't done enough research, but we've been very welcome and we've been very grateful for it.
Great. Yes.
The question was, are there other ingredients that are mentioned that are no longer valid? And obviously, basically every champagne vintage he's ever mentioned is long dead. But it's very difficult because even things that you expect to be as consistent as spirits, whiskies, and gins and things like that will change over time. He specifically mentions Gordon's in the Vesper, and it's a brand that still exists, obviously, to these days. One of my favourite gins, still to this day, is the export strength Gordon's that you can get. Genuinely, the 37.5% green label stuff that you get in the UK is a bit crap. But the stuff that you can get that's stronger, you can get in the continent, is
47.
really
Really
Is that
good.
on the juniper berries on the label?
Yeah.
The yellow label
It's
juniper
the yellow
berries.
label one that you get in duty free.
Yeah.
So we in the Vesper in the Burke is made with Ian Fleming gin, which is the estate's own gin, which they have built to be as closely described to what he would be drinking at the time. So that's the one we've used in the book. If you're keen on using Gordon's, because that's the name in the book, we would recommend using the export, which has got the higher proof, which is what it would have been tasting like at the time. But there's loads of kind of versions of that where we made sure, and we've not really fiddled, can I say that word, with the classics. More than maybe a couple bitters that we would recommend that you can get today. It's more of I know that sounded worse than I came out, but it's more in the 40 things that we've kind of created after the profiles are ones that we got, because we've taken respect that this is a book that will be kept for a long time. It's not just, because normally now today is kind of what's on trend at the minute when it comes on cookbooks and drinking books and what's kind of current. We respected that this needed to be both current, past history, and modern day. It needed to be something that can kind of live on. We needed to take reference to methods of making, and we needed to take reference to be somebody needs to be wanting to make this in 10 years time as much as they want to make it 10 years ago. So that's why we were trying to make it as classic but with fun ingredients that you can go and research, because if there's anyone that's a researcher, it's the Fleming readers. They love their facts and they love their research, and that's why we wanted to make sure that there were fun projects for people to go and find, like electric bitters and stuff like that, to be oh, that's actually something I can order off Amazon or wherever you are across the world and make that, and it's a bit exciting, but at the same time really making you good old-fashioned or Negroni that's in there in the best way that we could do it.
Yeah, I can't think of any products that turn up in Bond that aren't.
The vermouths wouldn't be the same. They would be higher sugar contents and stuff like that.
All the things that change, like Campari from 20 years ago tastes totally
Yeah.
different to what it does
Yeah.
now.
Super high in
There's
sugar.
basically, like, there's no way apart from buying vintage spirits, which will have also changed in glass,
Yeah.
to get as close to the recreation as possible.
And everything back then, because of the method of distilling, was a bit poorly. Could be. Especially for like a vermouth or a port or something of the such, you would be getting nice offcuts. They would be disguising a lot with sugar. So everything you were drinking back then would probably have a lot higher sugar content than what we'd be used to today. So we would not, but we balanced the drinks, so they would be balanced when you have them, but they would have been sweeter.
Speaking of spirits, our little quiz, and do not Google this. We just wanted to know if anyone had an idea what drink or spirit was mentioned the most in the books. And no, you're not going to win anything. It's just for fun. Very good. That's because you listened to her.
Exactly.
All right. Champagne has 121 mentions, followed by whiskey, 77. Gin and vodka come relatively low at 33 and 37, respectively. Rum limps in at 11. And the absolute loser is beer. So that is that. Well, I think, unless anyone has any more questions, I think that's a great, no, I don't see anyone. A great way to end. And thank you all so much. Thank you to Mia, Bobby, Edmund. I really appreciate this time. Thank you to Oriole for having us, one of my favorite bars in the world. Thank you to London Cocktail Week for having us as well. And of course, we couldn't have done this without the generosity of Diageo Reserve and Kettle One. So thank you so much. And please stick around and try all the different cocktails that Oriole's made from the book. There's going to be music. I wouldn't leave if I were you.
Yeah, and if anyone want a book and you want us to write in it, just let us know. We'll write anything you fancy.
And all
We're
the
all
profits
yours.
from any of these are
Yeah,
going to the Drinks Trust.
Yes, they're all going to charity, so they're great Christmas presents.
And they're here to talk to. So
And
run up
drinking
and talk to
martinis at the
them.
bar.
Okay? All right. Thank you so much, everyone.